Hello, hello. Welcome in to my Wednesday stream. I am EC. Oh, right. Haha, that's kind of a weird thing to say that way. My name is EC, and I like to have respectful conversations about nuanced topics. Today, we're going to be discussing the concept of synthetic luxuries. What are synthetic luxuries, you might be asking? Well, did you know that you've never actually tasted real vanilla? And you have probably never really touched cashmere. And if you've ever bought genuine leather, it's not actually really just leather. So, what prompted me in this mode of thought and wondering, like, where did this concept of replacing certain concepts, certain flavors, certain things that we take for granted every single day as the real thing with an artificial replacement come from and why? And I was also very curious because we're seeing this really odd phenomenon happening where institutions and representations of institutions like the film studio A24 is starting to take on certain things that I think, as a public, assumed they never would, like partnering with an AI research firm for a $75 million research partnership. So, what I'm curious about and what I would love to know is what you all are thinking about this, but also where and why is this like starting? Where did this become the norm? And why is the tide turning in this way that even a studio like A24 is comfortable going into this area? Oh, what is going on? Hello, hello. Also, I am having a interesting moment again with my streaming where it is showing me some funny things, error messages. So, if you could let me know if you're able to see what I am seeing, what I am doing, I would appreciate that so much. But I am, again, so happy you're here. If this is your first time, hi. If you have never been in one of my streams before, I am really happy you're here, and I am very curious about what your particular thoughts are in regards to this particular topic. Hi, Aqua. Hello, Brant. Hey, Gecko. How are you? Hello, hello. All right, cool. I just was able to pull up the chat finally. Cool. All right, here we are. So, what's really surprised me is this concept of artificial flavors, artificial concepts becoming so normalized that we don't even realize that they the thing we took as the original has never been the original. Oh, perfect. Okay, cool. All right, so that's interesting. So I am showing up specifically in the phone format. I I'm curious as to if my like whole thing will show up in both formats. I am hoping that it will, but again, I've been working on consistently testing this, and it seemed to be working, but of course, it always is not. It doesn't always work out on the day that I need this to work. So hopefully, at the very least, we can still connect vertically. If you're watching me on your phone, then I should be showing up in a more vertical format that is a little bit more um, comfortable for phone screens. If you are watching me on a computer, then I hopefully am showing up in the full traditional horizontal structure. But uh, okay, so Geeko is saying that I'm showing up in a small vertical part of the video, so it's just in the vertical form. Interesting. Okay. I'm not exactly sure how to fix that at this stage. That will take some going back into deeper background components. But I wanted to have this conversation with everyone today as this news just recently dropped, because I think when it comes to social conditioning, which is, I feel like, the core component of this entire conversation, it's surprising to me which spaces, which studios, which representations of authenticity as a society we often stand behind. We're seeing a lot of really silly and really oh, perfect. I'm so glad it's clear. Thank you. Geeko is saying that you're on a computer and I am showing up in the phone format, but at the very least it's clear. Yay! At least we got something. At least we got something. That is so interesting, but I'll work on that more later. Thank you so much for letting me know because I was like, what's going on here? It wasn't letting me stream for a minute, but here we go. But all right, so I wanted to talk about this today because I wanted to know first off where y'all are when it comes to this A24 news. We have this studio that is supposed to, at least as far as I have heard it to be, represented as this bastion of authenticity because it has consistently created films that explore various ideas in a more traditionally creative sense. At least our understanding of creativity in the film world, especially films that are generally not able to gain much financial support, seem to be able to surpass expectations when A24 is the studio that's producing them. And what is interesting is that a large part of the respect that A24 has been able to garner is because of their commitment to telling stories through mediums that feel very elegant, even when a lot of the stories that are being told are through the lens of horror. And horror is really interesting because it has long been a space to explore deeper, complex concepts without people feeling as if they're being preached to within the film. Instead, it becomes contextual information that helps you understand characters better as the tension rises. So the fact that there is this tension that is from an outside source, and it's normally, especially with A24 films, through the lens of something supernatural, like in The Witch or in Midsummer, this belief in a otherworldly existence and spiritual structure around the cult that was the main, I guess you could say, format and arbiter of fear in that film. So fear is used by A24 quite consistently as a really helpful tool for exploring deeper social issues. And you're also even able to explore deeper interpersonal issues between characters through the lens of horror or with Hereditary or things. It's like this art house horror that A24 really hit and touched, had their finger on the pulse of right when I think the world was ready for it. And what is interesting to me is that as a result of this commitment to what seems like sincere storytelling and creativity, we don't expect there to be AI anywhere in that process. We expect AI to be as far away from that as possible. But for A24 to then recently announce that they have signed a multi-million dollar research partnership with an AI company, it's very confounding. And that kind of got me thinking about the concept of creation in the first place, as well as this, what seems like a disparate idea, which is the concept of artificial flavors and artificial taste. And then Brant says, didn't Matt Damon and Ben Affleck just sell their AI tech too to cut out lots of crew? Did they? No, Brant, I did not know that. I actually had no idea. I did not know that. So let me move a little because I think I might be off center. Okay, cool. So no, I didn't know that Matt Damon and Ben Affleck had just done that as well, but a lot of creators in Hollywood, especially long-standing creators who have been like celebrities and famous artists like Ben Affleck, like Matt Damon, have gotten themselves involved in AI. And that seems very surprising, especially as generative AI has become more and more of a touchstone of pain for creative communities. I actually just recently watched one of the newer, is it Daily Show segments with Josh Johnson, and he was, who is it? interviewing, is it Lou Diamond Phillips? I believe that was his name. And this is an actor who's been in the industry for a very, very long time and is also I think a secretary of the Academy, or not a secretary, is a chair of the Academy. Um, yes, Lou Diamond Phillips. And what's interesting is in the interview section when Josh was interviewing, um, I don't know how to say his name without saying the whole thing, Lou Diamond Phillips, he made a point of discussing how going forward, any actor portrayals that are done by AI aren't going to be up for consideration when it comes to selecting uh, possible contenders for Academy Awards. And that he also acknowledged, but didn't exactly go into, the fear that a lot of writers and uh, crew and background creators of, at least the not as visible creators of the film world, have when it comes to AI and how it's being used in a generative way to write new films and take away opportunities for authentic creativity. And Brant is saying, I feel like if you can use AI to create good visual effects cheap and make high quality movies, it makes sense. And the important part is preserving the creative process. Well, what's interesting is there is a big difference between generative AI and, I guess you could say, non generative AI. But I will say the difference is very much based on how much of the process removes the ability of the creator to attain their creative goal, and how many jobs and long-standing careers that can absolutely eliminate by instead using an AI in to take over that space. So think of like Brand is saying that it doesn't seem like movies should cost hundreds of millions. Brant, that is actually a good point, is that movies in general are very, very expensive, and it can be hard to understand why they would possibly be so expensive when you see the film, it's a 2-hour film, and you're like, what would it take to make all of this happen? And that is part of the incredible component of filmmaking, is that the whole point is that you don't see how much work goes into it. It's supposed to seem effortless. And a good movie versus a bad movie can often be judged based on how effortless that process seems. Like if an actor seems like they are acting and it's too obvious, it becomes a sign of that actor not necessarily being a great actor. Keanu Reeves is a great example. He's not, we love Keanu. We love Keanu Reeves. He's an amazing human being. But is he the best actor? No. No. But at the same time, if we had, there are really important critiques to be made about filmmaking and the types of costs that are wasted in the process of making films. Because, I used to work as a background extra for various major Hollywood studios, and that's how I ended up weirdly in a bunch of in a bunch of films. Even the Barbie movie I was in it, you could technically see me for a quarter of a second. You can technically see me in one of the episodes of Beef from the very first season. It's um it's a weird space because you can see certain ways where films are definitely wasting egregious amounts of money. And you can see places where they're cutting corners equally as egregiously. So, for example, crew are never compensated to the degree, or I would say rarely compensated to the degree that they should be. There was a big scandal when one of the set dressers of from Obsession, Cheesecake, hello, hello, I'm so glad you found me here. Hello. Um, thank you so much. You're so sweet. But there was a bit of a scandal when one of the, I believe it was a set dresser, but also a kind of PA and crew member on this set of Obsession acknowledged that they had barely been paid for most of the work that they'd done because it was a small budget movie that wasn't supposed to, and no one expected was going to become such an international major phenomenon. And they had to spend a lot of their own, this crew person had to spend a lot of their own money just to attain the quality that was necessary for the film to be successful. And I can speak to that as well myself. Not that any of the things that I worked on were successful, but I've definitely spent a lot of my own money when I was doing costuming design for films and for indie projects and for music videos. Is that you, especially on indie projects, you do generally end up spending your own money because a lot of major financial backers have no interest in small-time indie creations. That's almost, it's like a hazing process. When one has to be able to prove that they can gain attention on a large scale with no, limited to no budget, or having to make very difficult decisions about what to do with that budget in order to afford the quality of creators that would be necessary for the film or the creation to do well. So where does AI come into this picture? That is why I think so many people are so frustrated with A24 and also so frustrated with this consistent pattern that we're seeing more and more on social media of trying to show where people who are just trying to show a quality of life, a standard of life, and access to wealth that a lot of people don't actually have. Even creators that we might follow and think are extraordinarily wealthy are creating the idea of wealth by buying bags on Etsy from huge famous brands or going and doing photo shoots in very high like high designer spaces in order to create the sense that they may have the finances to exist regularly in those spaces and be able to afford what is being sold there. And Brand is saying, but isn't that where AI could help most with indies? And Brand, technically, yes, you are absolutely right. It would probably be a lot more helpful on a financial level with indie movie making if there was a way to fast track on a financial level certain components of the process. The problem is that what that is ultimately doing is not necessarily fixing the core issue. So, and Mark, hello, hello. Mark is saying a chunk of things that you buy or want to buy are such specific or from obscure items or prop replicas that there's no way there'd be an official version, so I'm often able to find them from Etsy creators. Not with AI usage, of course. And this also leads into another component of a conversation I took in this week that was about how AI is taking over Etsy. There's a lot of creators on Etsy who are using AI and selling replications of various types of art with AI generated images or concepts, which is difficult because when it comes to how creation happens with humans over long periods of time, it takes, and it can take, years of practice, trial and error, mistake after mistake after mistake to perfect an art form and understand all the intuitive and contextual clues necessary to be an effective creative person in the field that you are attempting to be a professional in, or you are a professional in. The puppet field actually is a really good example of this. There are very few puppet masters who still operate and work consistently. It is such a diminishing field that financially people can't afford to do puppetry. And as a result, you're seeing that there is very little puppetry in most films now, other than brief attempts at revivals through like the re-release or the modernized version of the Dark Crystal that was released like, was that was years ago, but still, there are very few uh, professional puppeteers that still operate and can afford to operate, even though it is a time-honored creative tradition that that definitely precedes Hollywood. But without Hollywood, it's a lot harder for people to be able to financially afford following that artistic path, because who's going to pay for it? And that is a thing to keep in mind when it comes to how finances are distributed and how finances are utilized. And what this deal that A24 is making with DeepMind could unfortunately throw, what is it, oil on the fire? Yes. Did I get that right? Oil on the fire that has been brewing for some time, and that is the obsolescence of natural creativity, and the kind of I feel like a good example of the long-standing fears that every time there's technological advancement in that can be applied to creative fields, they there is a very strong backlash from the creators themselves who've spent a lot of time learning how to excel in that field. Now, there are things that are really important that can develop from technological innovation. There's really beautiful and amazing things that people can afford to do utilizing the like 3D animation and other things like that that can save lives and avoid a lot of uh, dangerous situations from happening, especially, and for specifically talking about Hollywood, but when it comes to doing stunts, doing certain, um, attempting to capture certain kinds of otherworldly or larger than life action sequences or uh, methods of accomplishing a story or telling a story. There are ways that it can be integrated really well. And every time there's a technological innovation, there is a long-standing practice of there being pushback and fear from the creators who were previously necessary before that innovation made itself readily available. And oh my gosh, Mark is saying Nolan apparently did a big animatronic Cyclops for the Odyssey, and I hope that the Muppet Show reboot catches on so we can get more of it. Yay! Yeah, the Muppets have been kind of single-handedly a huge support for uh, the puppet industry ever since they were created, which is not a small reason why Jim Henson and still is considered such a important figure in the puppet world, because of the fact that he was able to solidify a place in the film industry for puppetry in a way that not many other people had been capable of doing up until that point. Even if puppets had been used before, they weren't seen with the same level of characterization as what Jim Henson was capable of creating. And also, a lot of the creations that he went for were way more intense than what you would see in a lot of traditional puppetry. But that is, again, just one example of the type of creation. Can y'all hear Oro running around? She's so funny. The type of creation that can suffer negative consequences from a desire for a replication of the thing versus the thing itself. Which is where those artificial flavors come in. So what I kind of wanted to really explore today was this idea of the simulacrum and the simulacrum of luxury and the synthetic luxury of so many things we take for granted. So we have a couple of what seem like separate situations that don't seem, in any way like they have a overarching theme, but when you look at them side by side, they kind of do. And it's everything from this new deal with A24 to the kind of commentary that I've been seeing on and discourse I've been seeing more online as the rise of generative AI in a more normative and accessible space is changing what a lot of us view as creation, as authentic creation, and can very negatively affect smaller creators, creators who maybe aren't trying to become big Hollywood stars or be part of the Hollywood machine, but want to be able to create their art forms and support themselves with it. And Etsy, at the very least, was a relatively uh, helpful and healthy marketplace just to do that. It essentially was an online communal space to engage in direct commerce. I know I did a whole entire video on commerce versus capitalism and what all the different types of commerce are, but just a quick recap, commerce is very different from capitalism. A lot of people think that if you are exchanging money for something that is directly capitalism, and it's not. Commerce is a lot older, it's a different economic system, and it's based on essentially maintaining the community that it operates in. What we're seeing with this push towards a artificial representation of a creation, of a thing, is in many ways the core of capitalism. It's being able to push a item out for consumption in as many markets as possible until it becomes more desired than the thing it's trying to replicate. And that is such a core issue with this entire experience. So we have A24 over here. We have Etsy being taken over a little bit by AI over here, and that affecting the communal marketplace for people all over the world to exchange the goods and services that they can make at home or make in their own spaces or devote their lives to creating. And then Aqua says capitalism is about profits, indeed, indeed, versus community health. And then you have as well as something that seems completely out of left field, and that is actually the pool debate that's going on right now with the reflective pool in DC. Man, you have a national monument that has been, maintained, but not necessarily the first thing people think of when it comes to a symbol of national pride, unless you're directly referencing specific historical moments that have happened there. And the pool itself is not the main focus of those conversations. The speeches that were given around that pool are, and I'm referencing Martin Luther King Jr. and his I Have a Dream speech, which was right by the National Monument and the reflective pool area. But now you have a pool that is very badly being taken care of and updated with shoddy materials and with a lack of scientific awareness about basic environmental structure. And it's being used to create international fervor about the state of America. And it's very interesting because it's like, well, what does that have to do with AI taking over Etsy and A24 signing a deal with an AI research partnership? It doesn't, obviously, but what it does indicate to me is that there is a very strong comfort in a focus on an issue that is not the true issue that we keep seeing repeated when it comes to how our news broadcasts are often structured, the kinds of things that we as a society have learned to take in as genuine or important. And our ability as a full country and also our representation externally to the outside non-American world is it's never been great for good reason, because America has done a lot of horrible, terrible, bad things all over the world. But it's, oh my gosh, what? Mark is saying, also check out the story about the frog costume guy Trump is feuding with about the reflecting pool. If you can, oh my God, I love this, the frog costumes. Okay, well, that's another really fascinating thing that to me indicates the way that this whole idea of a simulacrum can be used positively. So most of the time when we reference the concept of a simulacrum, and you might be wondering what the heck is a simulacrum, could you please explain this? It makes no sense. Is a simulacrum is the idea of a copy that is, or a representation being made of a thing that nobody has actually had or seen. And then that representation becomes so popular that it almost becomes more important than what it is representing. The original simulacrum were actually the statues of Greek and Roman gods. And I think it was Plato had a story, wasn't a story, but he had a critique about the ways that essentially it's like a false idol. And it's fascinating to me how even though we as a society generally do really, really want to represent ourselves as caring for authenticity and genuine creation, we are very happy most of the time to take in things that aren't and find comfort in them. And is that always a bad thing? No, the fact that we have the ability to utilize something like a frog costume, which obviously that person in the costume is not trying to be a frog, they are simply utilizing a costume as a way of lampooning the cruelty that they are speaking against and the ridiculousness of the people who are encouraging it and creating it. It's equally as important to be able to use these representations as a method of communication. But what's funny and what's interesting and funny is the ways that we are very aware of these ideas when it hits certain pain points, but we're not necessarily aware of it in the ways that we've already just taken it in. So, for example, that's why I brought up artificial flavoring. Like, I had not realized that vanilla is a flavor that almost very few people have ever actually had, because vanilla is a what's it called, a petrochemical. And so is natural grape or artificial grape flavor and banana and strawberries. It's really hard to recreate on a mass scale the flavors of certain truly natural items, especially fruits. And instead, what many, even, decades and decades and decades ago, what many capitalists who are trying to figure out how to expand their capability to brand and create new products did was they realized that there would be no way to profit if they focused purely on what was available naturally for things like vanilla or things like cashmere, or when it came to even a lot of the food that we take in on a regular level, it's really hard to be able to produce the mass amount that certain companies wanted to be able to produce in order to have the biggest amount of profit from selling those items. So you have this really interesting shift that happens where people become very comfortable normalizing a flavor as the true thing when they've never had the true thing. Because vanilla is still one of the most expensive spices in the world. Truffle, as well, is another big one. Truffle is something that most people have never actually had because it is extraordinarily expensive and extraordinarily hard to get. It is something that even in really, really fancy restaurants, there is a particular chemical that is combined with oil, nice oils, but oil, to create the sense of truffle that isn't actually truffle. So you feel quite fancy. You feel like you've attained a specific social um, class or accomplishment by taking in certain representations of that wealth while you never actually have. And you'll spend a lot of money on it. Cashmere is the same way. You can buy a sweater that's like a couple $100 that's cashmere. It says it's 100% cashmere, and you can buy a sweater that is thousands of dollars that also says it is 100% cashmere, and neither one is actually true cashmere because cashmere is an exceptionally difficult uh, item to make. It takes a very, very slow and long process to create it. So instead, you have a lot of brands have learned that the average consumer won't know that they're not actually getting what they're paying for. And that is a huge part of this entire, I guess you could say, issue is that, for people who maybe are going to be coming later on in existence, what are they going to think about AI when they don't have the pre-AI mentality that so many of us have? And is this in any way reflective of how people felt about the internet when it first started? Now, this may be a little bit different because AI is not just an extension of an opportunity to communicate at a large scale with people all over the world. And it's not just an opportunity, it's not just essentially a massive web network of connection, which has inspired some very beautiful things and absolutely horrific and evil and just incredibly bad things. But AI is something else. AI is something that can be used to streamline, tedious processes, or it can be used to replicate an actor who passed away and have him act in a movie after his death. What does that say about a person's body and agency, though? Or the AI actor, was it Millie Norwood or Tilly Norwood, who was launched last year, and shows a lot about people's preferences that she's a young woman who is just maybe early 20s in her appearance, but she's an AI actor who does not need to have any type of agency in what she's made to do. She gets no chance, she gets no opportunity. So you're instead seeing this like representation of a human who is going to be used consistently in movies, in film, in all kinds of spaces where actors normally would exist. And that will also mean that there's going to be another person who probably has talent, capability, and the determination to become an actor and who is not going to because they can't compete with a bunch of code that doesn't get tired and doesn't care if it's asked to be naked because it doesn't mean anything to Tilly Norwood if she has clothes on or not, at least as far as we know so far. But, um, Mark is saying, I think I read somewhere that all shaved ice flavors actually taste the same. It's just different smells and colors that mask it. I actually think you are right, Mark. There's a lot that goes into taste that has nothing to do with the flavor you're actually taking in. For example, a lot of flavor, a lot of taste is aroma. It's what you are breathing in before you actually have any like direct contact with like tongue to flavor. And I think that's really interesting because it is maybe that is the core of the problem is that we're missing all of um the aroma. Maybe AI is a replication of the taste, but you don't get the same full contextual components that create something meaningful on a deeper level for most people. When you have a film studio like A24, which has been so incredibly uh, renowned for the fact that it makes films that are so engaging, emotionally disrupting, and willing to explore components of life that on a social level aren't always as comfortable. It starts conversations you wouldn't expect. And it also explores, I guess you could say, even technical opportunities for people behind the camera to have a deeper resonance in how a film shows up. I think who else is another, like the cinematography of most A24 films is very iconic. It's very specific. You can normally spot an A24 film based on pacing and color grading and subject matter very quickly. There are certain hallmarks of it. And you see that with other directors at different points in history that go even beyond just technological accessibility at the time. Wong Kar-wai is a really good example. Somebody who used a very specific kind of cinematography, a very specific kind of color grading, and a very specific type of technique to attain something that created a world that felt larger than life. And I was wondering, okay, so it reminds me a little bit of, the idea of like wasabi. So, um, I don't think anybody who has not visited Japan and had wasabi in Japan has ever had real wasabi. It's just horseradish and food coloring. Um, And there's a reason for that. It's because it's a very, very hard to attain spice that only is available to root vegetable that goes bad within 15 minutes of it being grated. So when that happens, when we have never had the real thing, we're going to assume that the what we're used to is the only real possibility. And if you don't know that there is something to compare it to. And I can see the same thing happening when it comes to generative AI and it being able to replicate some of the signals of authenticity that are so iconic when it comes to an A24 film. So when it comes to like these signals of authenticity that help us as humans establish a sense of real versus not real, what happens when that gets into more fields? And we all know that AI hallucinates and that it also will respond based on what is most likely to continue its programming and to keep it working. So how can we necessarily maintain our sense of real versus not real, especially as there's become a sincere interest in extending the world of what AI can reach into various areas that should be off limit because they're not on a screen? You see that with AI, with meta glasses, you see that with the kind of desire to bring the virtual world into the real world and meld them together. And over time, and I think we've had so many cyberpunk movies, animes, and more about this, a lot of books about this, but you do start to see this shift that affects what people feel about real world things. And there's another component that I kind of wanted to bring into this idea, which is exploring the concept of, again, a synthetic luxury, a simulacrum of quality, and also a simulacrum of wealth. And that is what happens when you're exposed consistently to artificial things and you don't necessarily have the real thing. When you see the real thing, are you going to prefer it? And there's an interesting, I'll link this in the description, but there's an interesting kind of commentary that has gone on for quite some time that is about as well things like attraction. So humans in general are very impressionable when it comes to what is deemed as attractive. There are certain body types that in our more Western spheres we probably wouldn't find or wouldn't be seen as Western and conventionally attractive, but in other spaces are seen as profoundly attractive. And there are beauty trends and beauty standards that are now to us probably a little weird, a little like surprising, but as time goes on, we are able to see them for what they were when they were important and like the influence of their era. I'm thinking of like Elizabethan era England. I'm thinking of like the foot binding process. I'm thinking of um, I'm Brant, that's an interesting question. I'm going to get to that in just a second, actually. I'm thinking of even the 2016 like makeup styles. There's that is a really interesting exploration of how attractiveness is very influenced by community response. So if a community says, you know, this is the thing, and the more and more people say, you know what, I believe this to be a good thing, then it does affect the people within that community into believing that that thing is a good thing. So when you have a lot of like artificially created physical bodies as representations of attractiveness, and you see that more and more highlighted in film, in media, in video games, in various forms of creation and art, it changes the perception of what is attractive. And there are definitely lots of jokes about that, but there's also lots of real world effect. So you'll see, I think that there's definitely was a huge boom of conversation around like cosmetic surgeries and things like that in like the mid 2000s to the 2010s, where there was a lot of misogyny, and I also think fat phobia and racism in the way those conversations were handled at the time. But what you see is every time there's a particular person who gets highlighted as the paragon of attractiveness, there is a ripple effect on a larger community level of whoever is affected by that influence into wanting to be that version of attractiveness. You see it as well with what people will highlight as the representation of attractiveness that they can think of. I'm thinking of J-Law in like the 2010s, where all these people in the mid 2010s to early 2020s, where all these people were like, Jennifer Lawrence is the most beautiful person ever. And this isn't a commentary on Jennifer Lawrence's like physical attractiveness. It's just a lot of people then started, because a few people started saying this was the person to emulate, a lot more people started to fall into the expectation that that was a standard of attractiveness. And it shifted certain mentalities about what could be seen as attractive. And you see that shift happening with, especially I would say maybe the most with women's bodies. Uh, Again and again and again. Like right now, especially with Ariana Grande and her recent like LA shows and tour, people have been noticing that she's the way that she is physically could be indicative of something quite dangerous. But skinny has somehow made itself in again. So now you see a lot of artists, a lot of creators, a lot of celebrities who are losing and removing a lot of the physical alterations they may have had to have more of a voluptuous figure, which was popular for a period of time, going back and losing mass amounts of weight that are, is it healthy? Can't really say, but does it look healthy? Not necessarily. And you see that especially as there's a wider availability of weight loss drugs, GLP-1s. And they're you're even seeing it with Euphoria stars. And it's I think all of that seems like this swirling amount of like, well, how is this all related? And it's ultimately comes down to this core idea of what becomes normalized in a particular community can have far-reaching effects that have real-world physical impacts for more than just that short period that that thing is seen as ideal. So, as Brant was saying, like, you know, the like BBLs and the way that our perception of what our own faces can look like, especially with being like AI being used for like facial filters, and you know, how that can mess with your own understanding of your um, physical self and what is seen as attractive or not attractive, but is still highly based on a very specific format of what is seen as attractive. And you're seeing people reach for more invasive cosmetic fixes for things that maybe don't need fixed. But with the standard of beauty that you're seeing within the echo chamber of algorithmic social media, it's hard to know what is real and actually desired versus what is seems to be desired and the good thing. When within the community you're in, you're seeing the same pattern again and again and again. And yes, Aqua's also talking about how GLP-1s use the buzz term of microdosing, which that is a whole stream in of itself. I know Rebel Wilson, who has been outed for a little while as not being a good person, has been a huge, huge, huge promoter of GLP-1s and the idea of microdosing GLP-1s. And there, the whole idea, the whole point is that there are people who have legitimate health reasons and benefits that they'll receive working with a qualified physician with using certain kinds of medication. But a lot of people who are going to reach for that medication are not the people who may have that health benefit. It could go very badly. And you see this, there's also this thing on social media, which is its own version of a simulacrum, because there is, it's a joke by this point. There's the real world, there's the real life, and then there's social media is not real life, which becomes a trending topic. And it's that, like the Brooke Monk situation, where people were so upset because a huge, huge influencer dared to take off her makeup on a camera next to her partner, and people decided that they had to compare whether or not one of them was more or less attractive than the other, when she just didn't have eyelashes on. I didn't really see the difference other than that she didn't have eyelashes on. Like, she just looked exactly the same to me, equally as beautiful, equally as herself. But you have influencers who are being kind of upheld again as trying to fit particular beauty standards, beauty norms, trying to fit the synthetic luxury that is being promoted on social media and now through films, and had been originally promoted through films and various forms of presentation, celebrity, and the idea of celebrity. All of this is so many different things, right? But they're actually all just following the same exact pattern. And we're seeing this with technological innovation as well. But it's that pattern of, here is an ideal, nice and sparkly and shiny, like my nails. Now, if you want to achieve this ideal, here are the ways that you can get to the ideal. Whatever you need to do, get to the ideal. Oh, you can't? Okay, here's something else. We're going to make this the ideal now. It's supposed to pretend it's here. It's this. You can have this. And then this new thing becomes more desired than what the original ideal was. And it's such an odd idea, but it also is very possible, very capable of happening when you have echo chambers of community that will not necessarily check each other. And with things like the internet, you have the capability of those echo chambers being much wider and larger and international than they may have been before. And Mark's saying, I once heard someone say that Twitter is designed to remove people's chill and keep them constantly involved in pointless discourse that they mistake for activism when it's not, it's entertainment. Oh, yes. Mark, that is a very, very important conversation to have, is that concept of activism versus entertainment. And where is the line between representation and artistic commentary versus in relation to activism versus entertainment. Oof, all of that. Yes, I want to do a stream on that concept, that exact concept. soon. Maybe I should do that next week. Is it entertainment or is it activism? I can see some people getting mad about it, but it's worth it. Brant says that also sounds like Fox News and conservative media's game plan. Well, we can actually absolutely see, and this is how it gets back to the reflective pool, we can see that in action when it comes to the reflective pool. You have a situation that has nothing to do with what is being spun up in the social media space, in the media spaces, in the news cycles about what's going on. You've got a pool, it got repainted, it was not repainted well, and then natural phenomena happened. Algae grew. Oh no, it's summer. And the people who are taking care of the pool now maybe don't have the right ability to do what they may have professional capability to do to take care of it properly. So now we have somehow created an artificial concept about what happened to the pool that is now selling a story all over for the news media for a mere fact that there was some human error that was possibly a little bit purposeful. And it becomes a massive news story that hopefully distracts from the fact that the war in Iran is supposedly over. Ooh. Ooh, Ellie is saying, I'm thinking about the new GTA 6 prices. There is a new GTA 6? Is that actually happening? Is GTA 6 ever happening? 80 bucks to play a game, but limited access with tattoos, cars, and locations, and the 100 big ones for full access, and hard copy version has no disc. What? Just a case with the code printed on paper. Lord. Well, yes, this is another good example is gaming is a huge, and I think one of the most effective examples of this concept of synthetic luxury and artificial taste, artificial existence. Um, Marcus says, TLDR, Donald Trump did a thing and sucked at it, which is barely news at this point. Yes, very true. But what is he doing? He's creating a ridiculous story to cover for another failure he has created. And he knew that things weren't going to go well. I don't know why he chooses the things he chooses because they are so inane and bizarre, but they are effective. And he has done this for years. He did this back in the 80s. This is how he got himself famous, how he got himself into the upper echelon of New York when he may have had like obscene amounts of wealth from his father and his family, but was not accepted into the right circles. So he used tabloid media. He would give tips. Him and his former wife would give tips using names like John. They would call the tabloid media and either tell them to be there at a particular time to get certain photos, and he would stage this image of himself as being involved in an upper echelon he had no real access to because he was seen as a joke. And so he's recycling the same format that he has recycled since the 80s because it is a consistently effective format. And it is, in its own way, something I kind of hinted at earlier when it came to the idea of people trying to create this idea of access to wealth and luxury by being able to buy truffle oil items at fancy restaurants, having, going to these luxury brands, luxury good spaces and taking photos within those stores while not buying anything from there because it's too expensive. But then getting bags from those brands on Etsy to create pictures for social media or videos for social media, pretending that they had been there and spent a bunch of money. So it's again, pretending one has access to wealth without actually maybe having access to wealth in order to create this sense of having access to a lifestyle that people on social media will find really engaging. And so they'll want to buy into the fantasy that is being created and, using follows, likes, and engagement to make that happen, which in turn then helps create a financial incentive for any creator who is willing to go to that level to do that. So I'm seeing as well. Brand is saying, I read something today that talked about the reflecting pool as a perfect metaphor for his presidency without the serious consequences. Corruption, ineptitude, and blatantly self-serving. Yes, absolutely. You are 110% right, Brand. And then yes, getting back to um, gaming industry. The gaming industry is a really good example of this because once upon a time, when you bought a game, you just got the game. You could own the game for years and years and years and years. Would it be an updated version necessarily? No. If things had changed, things had changed, but you had a physical copy of that game. Same thing with films. You would get a physical copy of the film and you'd keep it and then you'd have it for however long that that film could be played on whatever media player you had. Even if you had to you had to Cowboy Bebop it and try and find an old VHS player in, Forgotten Ruins, you could still do it and play the film. Yes, I did just reference Cowboy Bebop. But this is also something that has been, um, as Aqua was actually pointing out, the concept of even having that physical disc, though, is of itself a synthetic luxury. Because Aqua's pointing out how even hard copy discs haven't been real for generations. The disc installs the game to your console with limited access, but you need the disc inserted in order to run the full download. So it creates this sense that you have the thing in a physical space that you can hold, but you don't. You still have to pay to access the thing that is being held in an unphysical virtual space. And now games are subscription based. So you can, just like film, you could have bought a film but never have access to it if the platform you bought the film on is gone for you or you don't have. Even if you and I found this out the hard way with when I tried to buy, was it Perfect Blue? And instead of actually having access to the film separate, I thought that I had bought it so that I would be able to download it and have it on my computer. Nope, couldn't do that. Instead, I had only the ability to play it on the platform I'd bought it off of. And if I didn't have access to that platform, then no dice. If I was no longer paying the subscription fee for that platform, no dice. I don't have the film anymore. Even if I paid for it, it doesn't matter. And there's this idea that if you have a lower price that you're paying regularly, like a subscription service that is like, oh, it's only $6 something a month, it's fine, that adds up. And how much are you actually paying in comparison to the amount of films or games or other things that you're watching or taking in? If we ever actually compared the price of what a general film would be, even maybe accounting for inflation, that, based on series that we would buy and watch versus how much we're actually paying for the subscription to have the right to watch it temporarily, I feel like it would probably be a pretty big difference. We'd probably ultimately be paying a lot less if we were able to own the physical media. But that doesn't make the companies that are running the streaming services any money, does it? Instead, it encourages a lack of expectation that we should even own the film or we should own the game. It's like talking to a statue of God versus being able to speak to God directly, which I know might seem like a big difference, but that is where the concept of simulacrum came from in the first place. And then let me catch up on chat. Mark is saying there's a Ferrari store that sells not, Ferraris, but Ferrari branded products, jackets, keys, chains at insane prices. And you can, oh, yes. And Mark also says he's still buys physical media whenever possible because it is really easy for that media to disappear. It's so true. And then Aqua is saying, fun fact, the warning at the beginning of movies, your physical copy is still just a license to watch it. Theoretically could be taken from you at any time. Ah. Oh, and Ellie is talking about went your favorite App Store game, which was Pocket Morty's, which is a Pokemon Rick and Morty game. Oh my gosh, was removed from the App Store, so it's gone forever, and that's true. Um, and Aqua is saying no one could legally take that physical media from you even after you bought it because of that legal disclaimer, but they technically could, and that does go all the way back to VHSs. Um, Yes, and then Ellie is also saying this is why the Criterion Collection is so important, is because it gives cinephiles a hard copy of movies, even films exclusively on streaming services. Ooh, I didn't know it did that. That's cool. What? Oh, um, yes. And Brandon says the warning is more about a single license to watch the movie, to not copy and reproduce it or pirate the copy. Well, that's also the thing, is that, you know, I will admit that when it comes to piracy of physical media, that's how I got my original. That's how I actually got a lot of my original a lot of original music when I was a kid and I was living in a where I in a space where I actually didn't have access to the internet regularly. It was only through a one Ethernet cable, and I was living in a country that I wasn't from, so I didn't have a phone that I could connect to easily through Wi-Fi. Um, and I also was in a small town where Wi-Fi just wasn't as normalized and accessible everywhere. So even if I could get Wi-Fi on my phone, it would be brief and in very specific spaces, often bars, which I wasn't allowed to be close to or in. So I couldn't go. And so I couldn't always, I'd be like standing outside trying, anyways. But so what I would do is I would go to the library and I would rip CDs. Like I had to learn how to rip CDs. It was such an interesting experience, but I ripped CDs because they had a bunch of random CDs, and that was how I took in a lot of music and learned a lot about music that I did not have any reason to find otherwise. Because I could only download so much from YouTube. So when I did have that access to the internet, so um, whoa. Mark says Criterion Collection just announced a complete box set of Kubrick's filmography, so you know if you have $600 lying around. But and Aqua's like, we have all done some piracy at some point. But yeah, that is true. But either way, the idea is that we have a representation of an item. And we become so accustomed to only having the representation that it doesn't occur to us that we don't actually have it. And, you know, as Ellie was identifying with the game that is now gone from the App Store, so it's gone forever. I actually recently had a similar thing happen as well. One of my all-time favorite artists who I only had access to through Instagram, I did buy a lot of her work. So I do fortunately have physical copies, like the art behind me, which I actually don't know if you can see in the vertical stream. Maybe I need to redo my whole setup. But the art behind me, I that's it. She has disappeared off of everything, and there's no way for me to find her. Now that she's off the internet, I can't find her. So I can't continue to support her work, which also means I don't get any more of her work. Any of the things that I had, hoped to, even future releases that she was working on, that's gone. It's gone. I don't know how to find her. There's no way because she's not on the internet anymore. So any access to um, anything related to her is gone. And other than the physical prints that I bought, gone. And I think that's, oh, whoa, okay, I gotta check this out in chat. But okay, but yeah, so it's just like there are so many ways that we don't realize things that we take for granted as being physically available or going to be available in the future are 100% up to the streaming platforms. If, for example, there was, that artist that I referenced, if the reason she was not on any of the social platforms that I knew to find her on was because she had been removed by the platform's decision, then there would be, how would I find her otherwise? How would I find, like, be able to connect to her if every platform that she could use to communicate was no longer hospitable to her. Her art may still be very real and it is still very real, and it may still be very physical and very available. But if you can't use the social platforms we have, like the internet, then you don't have an easy or accessible or even consistent way to make a living off of your art in the way that you would if you did have that access. So access is such a big and important component of this. And when you go back to A24 and you go back to Etsy and the AI, rise of AI art within these communal art spaces that are represented virtually, there's so many ways that this is kind of a signaling of a shift on a larger scale away from the opportunity to maintain a sense of reality in the face of generative AI and generative creation. It's the synthetic representation of the thing and not the real thing. Just like Val Kilmer in that upcoming movie. Val Kilmer is passed on. He's gone. He's not going to be coming back for any more films. But with this new generative AI, they can make him come back as many times as they want with no ability for Val Kilmer himself to have set standards about what his representation of self would be willing to do on a screen. They could have him do anything. And that is a little concerning. Um, oh my gosh, there's conversation about piracy in chat. Always good. And then Ellie is also talking about how access is still like affected by social influence. So in chat, Ellie is talking about how Guillermo del Toro's Pinocchio and Frankenstein are available on Netflix, but the hard copies are available through the Criterion Collection. But you wouldn't be able to have the same physical copy access for a smaller director. It is only for huge directors that have been able to break millions or even billions at the box office. So when you go back to, say, Obsession and the set dresser who was paid $6,000 for weeks of work and had to pay a lot of their own money in order to help support the film and create the atmosphere, the environment, and all of the work that goes into making the film, that's not even speaking of post-production, and looking at the compensation that they ultimately got in comparison, if Obsession hadn't made millions and broken the expectations around what it would be able to do on a popularity level, there's no way that that person would ever get any chance to be compensated at a more equal space. And would Obsession be one of those movies that you maybe will eventually be able to find on the Criterion Collection? Probably not. It would maybe if it got lucky, make it to streaming. But streaming is again an ephemeral space. And it's such an interesting concept when you realize how many things within our world we're already accustomed to not having the real thing. Processed food is a great example. We get really, especially the access to fresh foods versus processed foods within food deserts that are purposely created. There's real world consequence. And then at the same time, you have these food deserts, you have these spaces where access to healthy food is really hard to get. And you have at the same time these really intense expectations about physical health and what one is supposed to look like because of now years of games and media of all kinds highlighting a very specific kind of beauty. And so many people are going to not find themselves as fitting that expectation and mold and not having access to the things that maybe would keep them in a healthier space to attain even whatever it is that is an approximation of that ideal. And And it's an interesting how many layers of this there are, because even though they all seem like different, completely unrelated, there are these overarching patterns. And I wanted to have a conversation about those overarching patterns today, because I feel like it's important every once in a while to take a step back and explore all the things that have a core component to them that until you look back at them, you might not see. Which is why I like having these live streams. Oh my gosh. Ellie says, maybe I should get a one wish willow to wish for a better economic system. Actually, though, yes. Actually, though, please. Okay, that is totally unrelated. But of all the things you could wish for, if you had a magical capability of wishing, is that all the things in the world that you could have capability of changing, and you want to force a person to love you who doesn't? I've never understood that about genies. I've never understood that about people who um, accidentally have access to, you know, supernatural powers. You're not fixing things? Or the new Superwoman movie and the whole Superman thing. Um, you could be Superman and can't you can't address any of the major consistent systemic issues. You can't make any of those people confess to their crimes, and also encourage corruption to be outed, and then whatever systems we do have that could have a possibility of doing anything about that, you can't Mom Donnie this. Like, come on. If you're Superman, like, okay. um Aqua, I am so here for your rant about obsession and the cultural response to it. You're right, Mark. And generally, Mark says, and generally with genies, one of the rules is they can't make people fall in love. Aladdin taught us that. That's true. Also, I don't know. I feel like it would be really fun to go back through certain fairy tales and acknowledge where they came from, because I know that there was the Disney version of Aladdin, but I feel like the Disney version is forgetting that the original version of Aladdin was written in it was supposed to be an understanding of what India would look like if you're coming from the perspective of someone from Persia. I feel like they missed out on a bunch of things. um, but yes. Okay. Or the other interpretation is that it was what, uh, like East Asia and maybe even southeastern, like, yes, like southeastern China would have been like if from the perspective of a Persian person. But we don't get to have that story very often, do we? Anyways. Ooh, Mark says if you're looking for supernatural powers making people confess crimes, check out Persona 5 Royale. Amazing game. Ooh, okay. Ellie says, okay, we're going into obsession talk now. Ellie says, FYI, Bear could have wished for a soulmate to come into his life sooner rather than later. Instead, he was too focused on Nikki, or rather his idea of what Nikki is. Which I think, yes, you're 100% right. And I think that might also be one of the points of some of these types of films, is it's supposed to be exploring the ways that a lot of times when people have kind of tunnel vision views about a human being, to the degree that they'd be willing to use a supernatural force to force that person into being with them, they might not be mature enough to be making that decision in the first place. Ooh, 100 hours. Oh man, I wish I had 100 hours to game. I'm not good at games, so it would take me 10 times as much. And Bran is also saying, why would he have not brought her to the hospital multiple times? Good question. A very good question. Very good question. Maybe because it is significantly more personally gratifying for people who are in a very specific mental space to have the object of their desire in pain, because then they are needed. The whole point is that she's not supposed to be person. She's not supposed to be contextualized. She's not supposed to be human. She's supposed to be an object of desire. Much like, sorry, but much like the simulacrum of, oh my God, okay, y'all are amazing. You know what he did? He took the ideal created by media and tried to force a real person into that ideal. So he created his own simulacrum out of Nikki. Love it when those things connect, but also very sad for Nikki. This sucks. But this is also very representative of what many people do in their real world relationships when they are influenced by the simulacrum of our social media and also the synthetic luxury that is dangled as the ideal within our echo chambers of community that has been kind of exploded and Akira-fied by the internet. So, oh, I did not know that. Aqua is saying also the amount of men who wanted a Nikki of their own and were like, that's my ideal woman, and missed all the metaphors about SA. Yes. Well, what was interesting to me when I was looking at the discourse around obsession is how many people were identifying Nikki as evil, as dangerous and evil. And that shocked me because the whole point is that none of the things that is doing are of her own volition. She's not choosing this in any way. She's being forced into every single thing that's going on. She never gets a chance to choose. And even when Bear is overwhelmed by what he is asked for, what she is doing isn't even what Nikki, the actual person, would have actually chosen to do. Because if she had actually chosen to do any of those things, he wouldn't have had to wish for it. And he wouldn't have been attracted to her in the first place. He wanted her because she didn't want him. And he wanted control over something he thought he couldn't have because he views her as a thing and not a person. Really? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Brant says she wasn't there for 90% of the movie. That's the thing. It's like so many of the ideals that people have about the maybe person who is physically close to them, who becomes an ideal in physicality, an ideal in personality. In reality, they're not actually like what we assume or project onto them. But and I do think that that concept of projection and creating a synthetic version, a simulacrum of that person, is a very normal human thing to do. Part of maturing and growing up is recognizing when we are projecting versus when we are seeing a human for themselves and their reality. And recognizing as well that our projection says a lot more about what it is we want or need or are not addressing internally versus about the person in themselves. And I do think it's interesting how with our capitalistic systems, what many profit-minded people have discovered is that it is significantly more financially powerful and profitable to take the projection that is natural in human community and create an entire ecosystem around idealizing those projections and then trying to recreate. Like, then you see people in real life trying to recreate those projections as if they are the actual expectation. And none of it was real to begin with. It was, maybe a couple of people's ideals pushed onto a person who just so happens to be um, there. And then a completely uninvolved person says, I see what's going on here. I'm going to take this ideal, I'm going to take that, and I'm going to make sure everybody feels as if this ideal is the expectation all around. And it influences whole communities. And when you have a superpower communication tool like the internet, then that influences a lot more and includes a lot more people, a broader swath of humanity within that community. And Ellie says, I view the demon Nikki as the version of Nikki created in Bear's head, taken out and put in Nikki's body. Yes, Nikki has the ability to see what's going on, but no control. Only the wish Nikki is in control. And then Bran is also saying, and it's justifying it all in Bear's mind to live in his fantasy. Exactly. So that is exactly I think, especially in the terms of obsession, the kind of concept that I was just illustrating with that idea of um, a person's internal projection on that is being pushed onto another human being who is wholly uninvolved, but an easy, I guess, canvas for one person A's projection onto person B, and then person C sees projection, says, I could make money out of this. Let's make everybody I feel as if this projection is the goal. And you can see that in the structure of obsession, as Ellie and Brant are exploring right now, where it's like the demon Nikki is the projection. And the real Nikki has no say, no agency, no control. And the wish Nikki, the demon Nikki, is Bear's internal projection. So none of it is real to begin with, but it has real world consequences because Bear is running for his life a lot of times. Bear is unhappy at the end and many times throughout as he has to deal with the reality of what happens if your projections are realized. If a lot of people actually achieved the projections and the synthetic luxury of what we see online, they wouldn't like it. They wouldn't actually want it. They wouldn't actually enjoy it. And if they actually had the real thing, they wouldn't always know what to do with it. And I think that, or people doing it to stay in a political party. Brant, yes. And I think that's kind of the goal of this conversation, is to explore all the ways that this is actually realized and replicated in the world, far beyond artificial flavorings, vanilla or genuine leather, or cashmere, or wasabi, or the way that it is reflected in a contractual way or a kind of intimidating way with places like studios like A24 signing multi-million dollar deals with a generative AI company. AI and generative AI to me is simply another level and in a more intrusive and more dangerous level of this projection of a synthetic luxury onto a wider swath and getting itself involved in more fields than we maybe would have assumed it capable of being, and affecting how more people are going to assume what reality is. It's like when you use too many face filters and you look at your own face and it doesn't even look real anymore. And it's when you stop, and then I'm saying this from experience. When I look back at some of the posts I used to make on TikTok, and I'm like, oh, that looked terrible. what the what was that? But at the time thinking, oh, well, this is fine, I guess. This looks like me. But at least it's not as bad as what it looks like when it's not on and the light's all weird. But again, that's an environment very purposely that is created to encourage the use of those filters, because you use more of TikTok, you use more of the what do you call it? More of the social media platforms when you do that. and it makes it very weird. It makes it very difficult to disengage from those things. But when you get a little bit of space away, and then you're like, okay, never mind. Maybe I don't need it. maybe we don't need these projections. Maybe we don't need the synthetic luxuries in the way that we thought. Maybe we need to start getting physical media. And Mark is saying, it reminds me of American Psycho, how Patrick Bateman has all the money and meets all the beauty and popularity standards, but his life is completely empty and void of any real connection. Exactly. Also, earlier, Brant had talked about how, and I hadn't gotten back to that point yet, Brant had talked about how this push towards a artificial in contrast to authenticity would then encourage more people to desire authenticity. And to a degree, yes, I do think that is the case. And you are already seeing that in a almost like political stance that certain brands are using when it comes to their marketing, where you see certain brands who are representing themselves as being more focused on not using AI, not using modification of to fit a specific beauty standard, very purposely using models and creators and identifying models and creators as for the beauty they naturally possess, that comes from human difference, human uh, like what do you even call that? Natural human existence. How some people have like snaggle teeth, and some people have um, noses that aren't like the perfect, like the perfect little tiny button nose, and it's and body types are a range. They don't have to just be one specific style, and they also don't have to change because one style is more popular than the other. You don't have to Emma Stone or Ariana Grande it in order to be seen as even viable as a person in a celebrity landscape. And then people, oh yeah, and in chat as well, this conversation that's like being weirded out by fans of Patrick Bateman and how it's a lot of young men who are on the alt-right pipeline, the incel pipeline, are the people that cheer at the Wolf of Wall Street as something to replicate when it is supposed to be a cautionary tale. And Mark is saying, like, if Patrick Bateman wasn't a serial unaliver, that if you watch the movie, it would be a miserable life to live. Because it would be. It'd be horrible. And the argument could even be made that perhaps that's why Patrick Bateman is a serial unaliver. Because there is nothing else in his life that actually matters to him, which is sickening and embarrassing. It's like that's an embarrassing problem to have. If the best thing about you, the most interesting thing about you, is your violence, you could do better. You could do a lot better. And there's a lot of people who are looking at that and not realizing that exact issue. I actually saw a really interesting YouTube video, I'll link it in the description as well, about that was kind of exploring the school shooter episodes in various forms of media, specifically looking at the way it was handled in Degrassi. I've never watched Degrassi. It was definitely before my time, but it was something that I've heard about, but I know Drake was on it. But there is a particular character that was explored who I'd never heard of before, but was the reason Drake ended up getting in a wheelchair as well, where in the show, where it was supposed to be a opportunity, I think, for a TV show to process something that had happened only a few years before, which was the Columbine, can I say shootings? But yes. Um, and it was before school shootings became so expected and normalized to the degree that we don't even have reports about them on major news networks anymore. They happen so consistently that we don't even, I think the average person doesn't even realize how much they happen. And it was a, again, a really nuanced, interesting video that explores how, before that was a phenomenon that people had just become far too accustomed to having to navigate, that there is a exploration of this character who was already an unhealthy, abusive person, but had also experienced bullying and had also experienced, various other components that led to making choices that were absolutely horrible. But out of when it comes down to it, these characters are not definitely not meant to be sympathetic. Patrick Bateman, not meant to be sympathetic. What was his name in Degrassi? Oh, why can't I remember? Rick? No, something. But the character in Degrassi that was highlighted, who ultimately ended up becoming a school shooter as well, or the Wolf of Wall Street, who is a absolute saint of a human being. Um, yes, Aqua is talking about how South Park does a whole episode about the desensitization of school shoot. Yes. Um, oh, I'm just checking in on the chat. One sec. Jennifer Coolidge should play Patrick Bateman. Ellie is saying that it'd be nice to have a remake of American Psycho, but you want Jennifer Coolidge to play Patrick Bateman. Jennifer, I'm sorry, I have to check. Who's Jennifer Coolidge? That sounds familiar, but I don't know. Checking now. Oh, oh my God, Ellie, you're brilliant. You're brilliant. Oh my God, I just tried to imagine that, and that was funny. That was funny. Um, Mark says somebody once joked to any artist who's tried to satirize masculinity, I am so sorry. It satirizes itself. And then, but also nobody understands. Nobody seems to understand. Um, oh, I see. Aqua's talking about the episode where the school shooting concept gets desensitized in South Park, and it's Stan's mom having a full panic attack, and her husband treating her like she's crazy or on her period, and everyone just giving him the sympathy. Yes. Well, okay. So I think let's go back to our kind of generalized idea is that you have various characters where there's real world consequences based on this desire to maintain an ideal that is simply a projection of something that isn't even real or isn't even there, but then gets reinforced by media because it's financially profitable to create forms of representation of the ideal that isn't actually possible. And then it becomes a desire within the community that takes in that media to attain that ideal. And then you have real world consequences that can lead to things like as horrible as a Patrick Bateman or a Wolf of Wall Street or a can't remember his name, the Degrassi guy with the glasses. But either way, Brant is also saying, speaking of crazy masculinity, the White House lawn. Well, oh, I have not seen. What am I missing here? Oh, Lord. Woo. What is going on with the White House lawn? Oh, I spelled that all the inside out ways. Oh, because of the. Oh, what? Oh, Lord. That is bad. That is bad. I mean, again, this is a bunch of. Mm-hmm. I mean, again, I think that's one of the interesting things about this entire experience of all of us as a country and as a world who is we have the World Cup going on in the country, all over the country right now. And what is the choice that Trump is making? It's to physically destroy all of the monuments that represent the most, I think, celebrated physical components of the country. The White House, national monuments, the reflective pool of the national monument. It's all very purposeful because it destabilizes the sense of ideal being in the kind of gentleman conservative of eras past, embodied probably most effectively by Ronald Reagan, and restructures it onto him as a person. But does he actually have the capability of upholding the ideal that he is trying to propagate in the concept of that synthetic luxury he's trying to create using the same tactics he used in the 80s with tabloids? He can't. He doesn't. It doesn't translate to real life, and we're seeing the fallout happen in real time. He's going to continue to try to propagate this ideal because he has been able to create a very core group of people within the community who are choosing to believe in the ideal he is selling. But that group is dwindling. And as it dwindles, more and more people are able to see the reality of what he is versus the projection he's trying to sell. And fortunately, we're able to all see it. Obviously, many of us have seen it from the get-go. Seen it, whoever was alive in the 80s, seen it since the 80s. But there is enough of a group of people, and there were at least, it's starting to fracture, of people who were willing and excited and happy to buy into the simulacrum of his branding of himself that never was real. He sold himself as a financially successful human being. He's not. He never has been. He's just been good at selling an idea of himself. Even the things that he supposedly had a stake in or that were his companies, they weren't. His name was simply on them, and he sold the license to use his name. He didn't have anything to do with any of those companies, but he didn't have any, his own branding was not enough to sell the items that were not well made. And he himself is never capable of creating something that is real and authentic, that is able to withstand when the artificial gives way and dissipates. And I think that's the core structure of this entire conversation as we keep going in these like various circles around this idea is at the end of the day, the artificial concept, the simulacrum, the artificial synthetic luxury of anything from a flavor to a fancy jacket to a president, it eventually falls apart. Eventually, you learn the reality. And you have to decide for yourself, are you going to focus on the reality or are you going to keep yourself focused on the concept of the luxury, the dream that it makes? So, Ellie says, do you think we'll have a liberal, leftist, or conservative in the Oval Office after Trump? And then Brant will says, it will probably be a Democrat, more to the center, as people will just want victory after this. And Aqua says there are liberal leftist presidents running. Yes, okay, so I will say, considering how this entire regime, I think, was a response because people were so incensed about Obama being president, who was himself very much a centrist conservative president, even though he had on a lot of the ideal, like the kind of social presentation of a liberal president. And he was very much neoliberal, which is a very centrist space that can still lend a lot of conservative ideologies into his governance. I do think that the social backlash to the pure idea of us finally having a president of color led to this. Because so many people are so deeply racist that they were so incensed, that it was so comfortable for them to blame a singular person for so much more than their own personal failings to systemic, serious issues that were always part of the American systems and were only acknowledged later. Uh, I think that with the backlash of what we have two very intense options. I am worried we're going to end up with someone who's more like Nick Fuentes, who is significantly more, and I know this sounds nuts, but significantly more interested in being a Mein Kampf type of person, in a more obvious and direct way. Or we are going to end up with someone like, not sure. If we're lucky, maybe. My dream would be is if we could end up with somebody who is a lot more like Mamdani. There are more and more people who are recognizing that many of the beliefs that we've had and the artificial expectations we've had surrounding various social structures, economic structures, and political ideologies aren't actually representative of their own beliefs. A lot of people who are terrified of concepts related to socialism are starting to recognize how many of the core structures they rely on are socialist. But do I have a huge amount of confidence? I don't know. No, not really. I expect at like Aqua and as Brant was saying that we will maybe get a neoliberal, maybe a neoliberal centrist, which is not going to get us very far. But I do think that if we are lucky, there are enough people who are angry enough that we might be able to get something better. If we work together and actually work on our communities and establish healthy and consistent communities, you got to start in your own spaces and then build from there. So maybe, I hope so. I can only hope. And I know that there are, Brent says the primary calendar will have Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina first. Okay, well, I will say one thing that I should probably take into mind is that at least in LA, when we had our voting primaries here, and in California, there was a very serious fear that we would have Spencer Pratt as our mayor, which is basically a Trump point. It's Trump, but Trump when he was in his, what is Spencer Pratt in his 40s? Yeah, yeah. Basically the millennial version of Trump. Um, or is he Gen X? I don't remember. But either way, um, we would have a younger version. And I was very, very enthused to see that Pratt did end up completely like knocked out of the race. But we ended up with, I think we're, stuck. We do have the opportunity for a democratic socialist, or we have a neoliberal conservative who presents herself as somebody else. So we'll see how that goes. I think that there is a desire, a sincere desire for actual structural change. And I hope that that actually translates to the polls in a consistent way. So if you do get a chance to vote when you can, please do, because even though I know a lot of people think that it will mean and do nothing, it means less when the people who did get any chance or any opportunity to make a change or to affect our voting systems were the ones who want to harm mass swaths of people because of racism, xenophobia, and transphobia, and homophobia. So Even if you think it won't do anything, please give it a chance and start at the local level. You can do a lot more if you do. Yeah, no, AOC is never going to become president, I don't believe, until she's much older. And I think that's because a part of that is that a lot of people do not trust her, even people on the left, because she has consistently maintained her mentalities about many, many things. But I don't think that she has been able to win over enough people consistently with her messaging. Kind of like how Bernie was close but no didn't get there. I think we have the same issue with AOC, where she may have all the right mentalities, but the timing of when she is of when we like many people might want her isn't necessarily when she would actually have a chance. So Brand is saying AOC is such an amazing speaker. If she weren't cast as being so liberal, she would absolutely destroy the Republicans. Well, actually, Brand, I think one of the issues is that she is a little bit too center for many people. Brant says certain people will just tune her out. I feel bad for those people. That's sad. That is sad. And you know, Brent, you're speaking to something that is also still true, is that you have this, we have an Overton window that has shifted to a significantly more right wing and conservative space than we often like to acknowledge, where a lot of people are identified as like radical leftists is not very radical in the true sense of the structure of the word. Um, if anything, I would almost identify most people who are in more leftist spaces as just more representative of what was it, Jesus, what Jesus was doing. But you know, a lot of people don't want to have that conversation. But our general sense of what is considered conservative has gone so far right that the average is now expected to be something closer to fascism, and that's pretty scary. So hopefully we'll be able to shift things back a little bit. That'd be good. It'd be nice if fascism was not on the table anymore. And Aqua is saying certain people will just tune her out because of her gender. And that is also, unfortunately, extraordinarily true. And Ellie says, hear me out. Eric Draven for president. Draven 2028. I feel like he would do things. He would definitely get certain things done. Oh man. It would be nice if we could have I think there's definitely a lot of really amazing contenders. What I hope is that those contenders actually get a chance and are not blocked by the bureaucratic inequalities of so many parts of the country and the racist ones. So we'll see. We'll see. Again, like I said, we can only hope, and I hope for the best. So, all right. I think I am probably at my limit today. I did stream for a really long time for work, so my voice is going. It is pretty much gone. But thank you so much for jumping in for this conversation. I know it was a lot more abstract than maybe my last couple of ones, but I do still super appreciate everybody jumping in and really committing to having the conversation with me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Um, yeah, I agree, Brent. We need to get the Senate back so we can start getting the Supreme Court to be fair again. What would be nice is if we have all, yes, exactly. Aqua says, here's the thing. If you want liberal success at the top, you need to build the bottom first. We can't fix it top down. You have to have a liberal president, but conservative Congress. It will fail. I agree wholeheartedly. Yes, we need to start at the core levels of our communities and build up so that there is actual consistent support all around. Yes, yes, yes. Did Ellie, are you saying 6-7 or 07? Nice. All right. All right. Thank you, everybody, for coming in tonight. And I really love and appreciate these conversations. They're so interesting. They're so fascinating. And I always learn. So appreciate you all very much. Thank you so much for jumping in. And if you are new to my stream, I'm glad you're here. Please don't forget to subscribe. Also, please don't forget to jump in for my next stream, which will be on Wednesday, and also when I drop my next videos. don't forget to jump in. If you have any topic ideas for live streams or for videos, please let me know by either dropping it in my comments or dropping it in my Discord. It is? Oh, that's actually adorable. I I can't believe I did not know that, and now I do. Thank you for educating me. And Aqua's like, I came in after the misbehaving chat the other day. Yes, that's true. And this time, instead of misbehaving, we got in fantastic conversations. So, yes, I've realized if I wear black lipstick, I get a lot more people who are not as interested in anything I have to say, generally. So, and maybe just a little bit more interested in their synthetic version of me that they may be rejecting or having an idea of. Their simulacra. Okay, here we go. I'm done. All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you so much for jumping in. Have a beautiful night, and I will see you all soon. Bye.